I'm Tyler, and this is a 10-year-old iPhone. The iPhone 6 came out a little over 10 years ago, so at the end of 2014, and even though it's 2025 now, 10 years ago, it would have been the current iPhone, so I'm counting it. The iPhone 6 was the first iPhone to be bigger than 4 inches, and it was a pretty big leap back in 2014. Even though it seems really small now, it was massive back then. And I think that it still holds up decently well today in many regards. To try and see how much use you could get out of an iPhone 6 now, I decided to use it for the last week, and here are my thoughts. Now, there are some things I'd like to note. It couldn't be my only phone because my phone, an iPhone 14 Pro, uses eSIM, and you can't transfer that to an iPhone 6 since it doesn't support it. So if I left the house, I would have to use my iPhone 14 Pro as a hotspot, or just use it entirely because sometimes it was impractical to tie a hotspot to an iPhone 6, like in the case of FaceTime audio instead of a normal voice call. Other than that, the only real exception that I had was that banking apps and food purchase apps, basically anything where you needed to buy something, they were either not supported on iOS 12 or I don't feel comfortable putting my information into them. That goes for things like Apple Pay. So Apple Pay hypothetically would work, however, I didn't want to put my cards into a 10-year-old phone on outdated software. Speaking of software, it's running iOS 12, which came out in 2018 and got security updates for a couple years after that. So it's not completely insecure, but I wouldn't put sensitive info on it at all. In addition, not many apps support iOS 12 anymore. Sure, you can download older versions of purchased apps, but they tend to be kind of finicky. Some apps worked straight off the rip, like Instagram, Snapchat, and Facebook. They didn't need any further setup and just kind of worked. Same goes with Spotify. Some apps were a little bit weird and still mostly worked, like Twitter and YouTube Studio. Speaking of Twitter, for majority of the week that I used the iPhone 6, it worked mostly fine. Everything except likes worked, and that's not too big of a deal. Except on the very last day, it stopped working for some reason. I know there was an outage with Twitter, and there were some changes that they made, I think, but it won't load anything anymore. I get notifications somehow, but no tweets load and it's not usable anymore. So that's quite a bummer. YouTube as well worked, I think a week prior to when I started using the iPhone 6, but it doesn't anymore. It'll let you sign in and kind of let you get going, and then it tells you that you need to update and you can't update it, so it just doesn't work at all. But for the most part, social media apps still work pretty well on the iPhone 6, so even though they're very slow now and sometimes kind of outdated, you can get away with using it for most things, which I think is great. All of Apple's default apps are pretty well supported going back. However, Reminders isn't, which is very annoying for me. Apparently in 2019 with iOS 13 and macOS Catalina, there was a major update given to Reminders, so major that it broke previous versions. So this phone is on iOS 12, therefore Reminders didn't get that update. And it tells you that you need to update your iOS version to continue using Reminders lists made after iOS 13. In my case, they were upgraded, as Apple would put it. So I can't use Reminders on this phone, which is really annoying since I use Reminders like all the time. But like I said, otherwise everything is fine. Even Apple Music just works. However, there is one thing that you should know, which the storage on this phone is so slim that it's really hard to use Apple Music. I like having my music downloaded, and especially since I don't have a SIM card in this phone, it would be great to have music downloaded, but it only has 16 gigabytes of storage, and over half of that is filled with other. Now, I don't know what that other is, but I can't get rid of it, so there's barely any free storage accessible to me. and that means no music is downloaded from Apple Music. Storage was a pretty big issue throughout the week that I used the phone, so working around it was a bit of a struggle. Photos would often not sync to the phone just because it didn't have storage. And I am really grateful that nowadays we get 128 gigabytes base model. Even though there are higher options and there are people saying that 128 gigs isn't enough, for most people it is, and 16 gigs is nothing compared to this. So it's pretty great that we have so much storage on the base iPhone. In terms of other hardware related things, the iPhone 6 is meh in everything. The battery is meh. Well, I'd say bad, honestly. It barely holds a charge in my use. I could never get it to last anywhere close to a day. And sure, it is 10 years old. It has 83% battery health, but I would hope that my phone could last more than 3 hours on a charge. When I was using it, it would die after like noon. I can't go without a phone for most of the day. I know that batteries are better now, but it's just such a shame that these old batteries not only were bad from the start, but have aged terribly. You might have expected the camera to age terribly, but honestly, it's okay. It's not terrible, it's not great, but it holds up. It takes pictures, and one thing you should know is that the best camera is the one you have with you, which sounds a little cliche, but I mean, think about it. If you don't have a camera, you can't capture the memories at all. So it's better to have maybe a bad camera, but still a camera. With that out of the way though, the quality isn't terrible. The dynamic range isn't great, so your scene has to be either really well lit or have no lights at all, which low light isn't great in itself, but if you have a dark scene with a little bit of light, it throws everything off. It's a very touchy camera, which isn't something that I was used to with my iPhone 14 Pro. In almost every situation, I can just snap a picture and it'll look great. But with the iPhone 6, you have to be really delicate and set up scenes pretty well. Now, in the case of that happening though, it's not bad. I mean, the camera is only 8 megapixels, which is 6 times less than my 14 Pro. So the actual image quality, the resolution of it, isn't all too great. But it works pretty good. I mean, here are some examples right now, and I don't think they're terrible photos, personally. If you showed me them, I wouldn't complain. Now, video quality does give a little bit to be desired, but we have come a long way since then. And keep in mind though, this is 10 years old. 10 years before the iPhone 6, which would have been 2004. Camera quality, especially on phones, was absolutely terrible. So they made such quick advancement that it hasn't really been as rapid as it was once. One thing that a lot of people liked about these older iPhones was Touch ID, which is gone. And in my opinion, good riddance. On my Mac, Touch ID works really well, but on all of my iPhones, Touch ID hasn't. And I don't really know why. I might just have relatively sweaty hands, but it just doesn't read my fingerprint. On the iPhone 6, it'll set it up and it won't ever read it again unless my hands are perfectly dry. I had an iPhone SE 2020 at one point, and even then, the success rate was like 60%. Face ID is so much better in my experience. I don't understand how people think Touch ID is better. Another unique thing about the iPhone 6 is the headphone jack. Now, back then it wasn't unique, but now no phones have headphone jacks. Well, maybe a few, but the majority of phones sold, especially in the US, don't have headphone jacks. So it is welcome. However, there are some other issues I've encountered. I personally use AirPods, and it was a struggle to get them to work. Now, I've been testing the AirPods 4th gen for a video I'm working on right now, but those don't work on it at all. They'll say they connect, but it'll crash Bluetooth somehow. I don't really understand that. And the AirPods Pro 2, which I've used for a year, those take a couple reconnections to actually consistently play music, but they do work after a bit. I have a feeling that it's something with my phone specifically, because I can get those same AirPods Pro 2 to connect effortlessly to my iPhone 5 on iOS 8. So maybe it's just something with this phone. This phone isn't in perfect condition. You shouldn't expect it to be after 10 years, but mine was in pretty bad shape. I say was because I actually made an attempt to repair it. The charging port I was able to visibly see was damaged. Some of the pins were pushed down. So we had to charge it at an angle for it to even charge at all, and only certain cables worked. It was super annoying, and the main lightning cable that I used didn't even work with it. So I said, why not? And I bought a new lightning port to put in the phone. It was also having a weird issue where it thought that it had headphones in all the time. And I can assure you, it did not have headphones in all the time. And that was super annoying because it made the speakers stop working. It was trying to output audio to headphones that weren't there. So not only could I not use the built-in speakers, but Bluetooth audio wasn't a go at all. So I wanted to repair it. The repair process itself wasn't that difficult, honestly. It was surprisingly easy to get open. All you gotta do is take out 2 screws on the bottom, get a suction cup, and pry up on the screen, and there you go, you're in. There were a bunch of screws on the inside and some adhesive, but overall, other than it taking like almost an hour, it was a very easy repair, in my opinion. I spent around $7 on a new port on Amazon, and even though it seemed a little sketchy, it works perfectly fine. It charges well, and I haven't tried data transfer with it, but I will, and I'll let you know in some text up there how it worked. But that solved my issue. It doesn't think there's headphones connected all the time, which is great. It basically works like new, and while you might think that I should have just replaced the battery, I don't think so. Because for this video, I was trying to go for, you had an old iPhone 6 and wanted to try it out. I mean, that's pretty much what I had. I had an iPhone 6 laying around, and I wanted to see how it worked. A battery being degraded is going to be a common issue across all of them, but a port being physically damaged isn't a common issue and isn't something that should just happen. So replacing that makes it so that my phone is a pretty good common example. Thankfully, since the back isn't glass, there's a lot less leeway for damage. I mean, it doesn't have wireless charging, and that stinks, but it's a lot more durable, and my god is it thin. It was an established fact back in 2014 that the iPhone 6 was so thin that it could be bent, and I'm not going to try that on my own, but it does feel thin to the point that that's believable. Of course, I'm not going to try to bend it because, no, but it feels durable. It's not like it's a weak thing, in my opinion. Overall, in this last week, I had a pretty decent experience with the iPhone 6. Honestly, I'd go as far as to say that it's semi-usable. If I had to rate its usability on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give it a good 6. There are obviously drawbacks to it, such as not having eSIM, and not being able to download apps unless you have them purchased in your Apple ID already. But if you can get around those things, it's still usable, which shouldn't be too surprising, but it kinda is. 10 years is a long time for a piece of tech. I can't really think of any other 10-year-old pieces of tech that are still somewhat supported other than the PS4, which that's a whole other story. But yeah, I'm not telling you to go out and buy an iPhone 6. I mean, I can only imagine they're pretty cheap. Probably around $20 if you find a good deal on eBay. Don't go and buy one. It's a terrible idea. But if you have one laying around and want to try to detox yourself from trying to use your phone so much, it's a good outlet. Like I said, it still supports apps, so you have the option of using them if you want. But they are so slow that you're not like feeling the urge as much to go on it, if that makes sense. And if you want something that's kind of like a dedicated media player, almost like an iPod, you can do that with this. Because like I said, it supports Spotify, Apple Music, and has a headphone jack. 2 things that are pretty important to some people. Now, of course, I'm gonna go back to using my iPhone 14 Pro, which I used to film this video, but I bet some people might enjoy trying to use the iPhone 6 for a week. Well, that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like. If you want to see more, subscribe down below. And let me know what you'd like to see next. Until next time, see you. He's a sleepy kitty right now. So sleepy.